Well, listen, thank you all for joining us. I know there's a number of folks that have indicated prior conflicts, but a great interest of listening to this when they have a free moment the next couple of days. I really thought it was important after, I guess, starting on the morning of July 5th, receiving significant amount of text, emails, WhatsApp group notifications, um, but a whole set of series of communications. Uh, of course, alarming would be one thing, but the unfolding of what really is a tragedy, um, and that struck me as something that, even though I was not there, I could feel a sense of urgency, a sense of outright shock. Um, and it seemed to be one of those scenarios that reminded me a little bit of prior events, whether it was knowing several individuals who had lost their homes in the LA fires, all the way back to COVID, and then having lived in Washington, D.C. during 9/11 and on the East Coast. So it really struck me that a number of us were having very similar responses, and I call it being on the periphery, that while we may know somebody directly, a child, a camp counselor, owners of the camps, businesses, individuals. We know a lot of individuals on the ground that are doing the emergency response and the first responders, that there just seemed this overwhelming blanket that I felt if I could give something back to those of us who are on this periphery, I would try to do that. That's number one. Number two, it really struck me that in all the work that we do around disasters and risk, that I had met or gotten to know or knew of individuals that had gone through so many of these events and had themselves to figure out how to handle the tragedy by being literally survivors or parts of, community activities. And therefore, I thought we would take, an hour, a little under an hour, and just share some of the folks that I knew, and some of the stories and some of the tools and ways that individuals can take care of themselves, how they can help their own uh, response and recovery, but also how to be prepared for their friends and their families who are going to be, handling a whole set of personal loss, physical loss, operational loss in the days, weeks, months, and years ahead. So I thought it was an opportunity also to have individuals coming at it from both faith and operational and community engagement. And therefore, I am honored by getting to know through our mutual friend, Canon Jan Naylor Cope with the Washington Cathedral in D.C., who is a Central Texas, grew up, you know, Reverend, there, knew a lot, knows a lot of the families, um, uh, because Camp Mystic, as an example, has been around for so long, it's become generational. Um, so I would ask, Reverend, for you to take some time, give your perspective, and then my friend Jolie, who will describe the work that she does through Hummingly, who went through the tragedies of the Christchurch earthquakes and some of the, I guess, Jolie, to say the least, these are things that you had to learn on your own first. and then build off on, and which has really become a gift for helping these communities, especially most urgently around the LA wildfires. If it's okay, folks, we're going to record it so folks, can listen. And we will provide an opportunity for all of individuals to ultimately connect if they need to either Jolie or Hannah. So Hannah, please take a minute, introduce yourself, and give your thoughts because you were there in Hunt, but you've also lived through this and worked through this.
Thank you. I am, I'm not sure what the word is. It's good to be here, even as we deal with these tough topics of grief and recovery. I've been in Houston as the rector of Trinity Episcopal Church, which is on Holman in Maine in Midtown Houston between downtown and the Med Center. I've been here for 18 years. I was in DC for 8 years before that, and I was in El Salvador as a priest for 5 years before that. So, in each of those places, there's been traumatic events and just the human condition and the spiritual condition. Part of our everyday work as faith communities is dealing with grief and resiliency and recovery. So when I was in Central America, some of you might have remembered the Hurricane Mitch, which destroyed a lot of Honduras and Nicaragua. I was in El Salvador. It got part of El Salvador, but it was huge. Again, as Richard mentioned, I was in DC during 9/11 sniper attacks, not a natural, disaster, but traumatic events that shake the foundation of what you believe is the way your life is going to go and the way the world works. And then here in Houston, there's been, and my church has been directly affected, huge amount of damage during Ike, mostly because of the wind,
Yep.
but a lot of parishioners' homes and health. Then, of course, Harvey, and I don't want to skip over um, the floods that happened that affected neighborhoods in Houston, that affected parishioners during the tax day flood. Somebody's, house was destroyed. And, in a neighborhood that people felt secure. And that happened also in the Memorial Day flood. And then, of course, COVID. So I could just, the list goes on and
Right.
on. But,
Right.
and so we had a lot of experience with this. Um, and, and there's one, I mean, I am a priest in the Episcopal Church, so I'm going to bring in a little scripture.
Please.
But
Please.
the scripture that keeps uh, sort of a slogan to hold on to for me and my staff is from Romans 5:3-5. It says that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope, and hope does not disappoint because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit, which has been given to us. And so the point there, whether you're a person of faith or not, is to get, you know, some meaning in the suffering and get from suffering to hope, and not to jump too quickly there, which some people, want to try to do sometimes, but to take those steps um, in order to get to a sustainable recovery in whichever sort of traumatic experience you're in. And my husband and I actually were in Hunt Texas I was there for days beforehand on a retreat to write on my doctor of ministry. And we were at a beautiful home of a friend. I didn't know the area. I mean, I'd been there for a couple of little things. I knew about it from friends that lived in the area, and it was just gorgeous. It was just gorgeous. My husband came up on Thursday, and that night the storm was like fireworks.
Gee,
It was awful. We were on higher ground, so we were not flooded out. But I think this being in the middle of this particular disaster, the the theme, Richard, that you wanted to touch on about being in the periphery, we weren't from there, so we
right.
didn't know anybody. We were really trying to be on retreat there. And I had driven around looking for the best places to take the kayak, and we were going to go see listen to Ray Wiley Hubbard at the Fourth of July festival, and my husband's Salvadoran, so we were also going to get there early to see Los Juanes from Mexico who were going to play, and then we were going to go to the local rodeo on Saturday. So I didn't even buy that much food to cook because we were going to, we were going to be buying the good local food, right?
Right.
And then this terrible, terrible storm happened, and um, uh, all power out. All the water out, and we found ourselves searching for information because to be honest, I didn't even research that much about, like, I mean, who goes on a retreat and researches like the fire department? It wasn't, we didn't know where to go. But we went to try to find, for example, a connection, Wi-Fi, and so did all the other neighbors. So we all found ourselves, those who weren't completely wiped out, we found ourselves like crowded around on this hill trying to get connection. And that's where the not like literal like Wi-Fi and data connection, but the community connection from somebody from the outside, from the periphery. But the
Right.
folks up there, they all knew people. They all knew each other. So they started naming names right away. And they started, saying, well, my dad's at the, or my father-in-law's at the Hunt Volunteer Fire Department, and he says this, all trying to share information. And that was a way of coping. Some of the information was true, some was not. At that point, just gathering to try to make sense of where we were and what we thought we needed to do to be safe ourselves and to give back. Was just, it was very chaotic, but that connection and that sharing of information helped us.
Right.
We couldn't get out. We couldn't get out of Hunt. The rivers were high. We thought we were going to be there for days. The friend who had the house um, had said that the power wasn't going to be coming back anytime soon. So, and it had been raining for days. So I was a Girl Scout, but we could not make a fire out of those wet logs and twigs. So
Right.
got the
Right.
charcoal out and started checking on other neighbors that I didn't even know, but we would just, for connection, we would drive up to that little mountaintop where you could, or the hilltop where you could, get connected. And so the second day, we took all the garbage out because there had been no connection. And this is just how things work on the ground, right? So we took the garbage to the dumpster thinking, well, it's going to get full, so we might as well get ahead of the game. And I flagged down a neighbor, and that neighbor lived there. And she knew she had a favorite worker at HEB here in Texas. She says, my girl at HEB. Um, said that that their generators are going and she can get me some food and that the roads are passable. Now for that's different for Texans. That means if you have a tall vehicle, you
Right.
can
Right.
get through some of the roads. And so I asked her to take my number and to text me if that was true, that my husband and I would try to leave because it was threatening rain again. And I give you this detail because while we were waiting for her text, we got word from some neighbors who had like, um, some friends and family members and loved ones uh, die, and they
Right.
had confirmation, and it was, we're just there was nothing except stand there and listen to folks, to describe their families and pray with people
Let me
that
play off of
we could
something that
do.
you said. Let me play off two
Mhm.
things that you said. One is just by nature, the terrain of where this occurred. There's hilltops, there's riverbeds, creek beds, right? There's all of this different.
Mhm. Mhm.
These are also, smaller towns that
Very
are
small.
even,
Mhm.
even though they are by the crow flying or short distances, but they are literally through, right? So there's a
Mhm.
little bit of isolation. That's number one. Number two is if you were up mountain, so to speak, or up in the hills, that's one thing. If you were down below, so there was almost like two different, again, different perspectives. But I think the thing that you just said that's also very powerful is y'all just listened,
Yeah. Yeah.
just gave people an opportunity. One, it was unusual. You're not from the area. It's not, you don't know every back road, cranny individual, but you gave an opportunity for people just to have that chance to be heard,
Mhm.
right?
And that's that. Sometimes that's all you can do, and you learn that very quickly. And that's a lot. It's a lot because people need for someone to listen to their story. And people need they do need the first responders. They need, the folks going out. But in grief and recovery, they also need the compassion
Right.
and the retelling in order to begin to understand that it's real.
Yeah, but listen,
Um,
guys like me, we want to lean into it. We want to
mhm,
solve the problem. We want to, lift this, move that, do that, right?
mhm.
We're just, let's just get into the action, of solving the problem when in reality it is just that moment of just listening, asking questions, helping people.
And making connections
Right,
so that people can share their resources, which was also happening up there,
right,
which was very, very uh, uh, Texans of all classes, all races are very generous. They
right.
really are. And so people were, pitching in different ways. But if people had tried and to to leave right away, they would have just added to the danger, added to the rescue work. If people went, if you go down there and it has to be coordinated. I mean, there's an instantaneous time where you do what you can, right?
Right.
You see somebody in the river, you, and you know what you're doing, you try to get them out right immediately after. But there's so much knowledge that people don't have that they can actually do more harm than good
Right.
jumping in.
Can I
And
ask one other part of
Mhm.
this? All right, so you're in Hunt, but you all are not from there, and you begin to make your way back to Houston. You're in a community where, again, I'm not sure if it's directly parishioners or individuals just through your own work in faith, work in the community. You get in the car and you start heading back. Is that when it began to strike you that, wait a second, there's a lot of people being impacted by this? And how have you handled that as you're like
Mhm.
making your way back to Houston and then getting to Houston, suddenly kind of going, this is very significant. What can I be doing? Both as, from my faith-based perspective and just being who you are.
Yeah. Well, there was a little guilt that we could get out, right?
Yeah,
And we just had to, but we knew that we needed to leave so we wouldn't be a burden taking up more resources. And so as soon as we got that text from Ashley, who I just met, that our Subaru could get over, the bridges were gone, but there was a dirt road. We left, and we did, but we pulled over. And I'm telling you, one of the reasons I listed all those disasters that I have personally been through
right,
is because this one was it was just shocking. The day, the day before we were making plans to go kayaking in this beautiful, the most beautiful places,
right,
on the planet, this idyllic community. And I'd mailed out a package to my parents next to a camper's mother who was mailing letters to her camper,
right, right,
and you just and the store that just bought ice in, gone. That post office gone. Kayaks and trees, entire mobile home centers um gone. Not just the RVs, not just the recreational, not just the folks coming for the weekend, but the folks who, lived in the mobile homes who, felt also really lucky to be close to the river. And
right,
those homes were just gone. And we had to stop. I mean, we had to stop because we were both, my husband was tearing up and I was crying. I was full on crying.
right,
And but you could and we so we were thinking, of course, right away, and because what how could we help? And there's my bishop was texting me, and I knew that they were already the bishop of Texas was, concerned. And well, there's, this is the Diocese of West Texas, but we
right,
started a fund for them. And you have to be careful because right away, and we learned this, people start setting up bogus donation accounts and they start, getting contributions that aren't above board. So you really do have to, after the sort of urgent, this person needs medical care right now. This person needs food. This person needs to be pulled out of the boat, whatever. After the immediate, you really need to be careful what you donate to. And you also, unless you're a first responder, you don't want to be taking resources. And especially in this area,
right,
because the road is so small. It's not, they're not big or heavy roads. I mean, for the rescue equipment and vehicles to get where they needed to go, and some of the road was washed out to these smaller towns, but it was just it was so devastating, and miles and miles and miles of it.
right,
And so and then when we were driving home, the rain, and so Episcopal Relief and Development is our go-to. We want to be, holding hands with the neighbors, but if you're there and you're not trained, you can be taking up resources, right? So we
right,
we got out of there, and in our neighborhood, some families who were real connected and had real loss, they asked for people to put up green ribbons, and so they went wild putting up ribbons for Camp Mystic, and that was really good. Except one of the families then posted to our neighborhood group, "Hey, this we lost our daughter, and those ribbons are killing me. Can you take them down?" So, people react to grief differently, and you've got to be flexible. And then, find trusted news sources because there was that story that those two girls had been found high up in the tree, and people who are not suckers, for fake news sources, they said that to me, and I was like, oh, thank God, and I was praying. It was not true. So people can get just in the emotion of it all.
Right.
And people are like, well, we're going to go down, we're going to go we're going to give clothes. People don't need to be, they need gift cards so they can go get the clothes that they need, not start sorting through clothes. They
Right.
need, they need money, and they need gift card. They need practical things. One time I saw from a trusted source, that they gotten a donation of, rotting fruit, and of course there's a lot of really wonderful things that got delivered and are life-saving and continue to be life-saving. But you don't want to do a lot of one-off things on your own because you don't know. You don't know how long the fruit will last, and the weather in
Right.
Kerrville where there's no place to,
Or storage or
refrigerate it.
cold storage. All right,
Yeah,
let me ask one other.
and yet the folks that were down there that are,
Right.
with the skills to, you know, with the, to do the things are needed. And so just,
Right.
the donations to that support. And I know it's hard for we want to fix it, we want to make it all right, but a lot of times you just have to um, sit back and look for how you can be there in the long term.
And find out what you're being asked or what you
Right.
can.
Yes.
All right, let me ask one other question. I want to turn to Jolie, and then I want to,
Yeah.
uh, uh, okay, you're back home a week now, about a week. Okay. You're in Houston. What are you hearing from your parishioners, from, contacts in neighborhoods? How are you advising, both from, a one-on-one ministerial kind of role you know, from the pulpit, so to speak? How are you handling the folks who are saying to you, that you either see at the grocery store or at the church, or who are just literally going, this is just overwhelming? What are you saying to those individuals?
Well, there are, and in Houston, there are a lot of places that have offered, for example, moments to get together. And again, I'm the rector of a church, so I believe that just being together in community is very healing. And people can talk about what this is bringing up for them, the connections that they have, the loss that they feel, even if it's peripheral, even if they just went one 4th of July down there,
Right.
or even if they, just went to the Guadalupe State Park last week and, went fishing or whatever, to get together and talk about these things and more, and show legitimate resources, and is really important. And so a lot of the churches and other centers of faith have been offering services of grief and reflection and healing, listening to the families about what they need. And sometimes, like I said in that example about the green ribbons around the trees,
Yeah.
sometimes it's conflicting. We want to
Right.
do something. What's comforting to one family is not comforting to other. You have to keep yourself out of it and be, really listen to what people need, and then sharing the resources of grief counseling places for kids.
Right.
Bo's Place is a wonderful grief
Yep.
counseling resource for kids. And uh, just acknowledging that people, including myself, this has been how many disasters now, just the sadness and the horror of the loss. You need to take time to pray, meditate, breathe, walk, talk, cry, um, and 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 get together with folks and identify at least one or two things that you can do, even if you can't, drive down to, even if you shouldn't drive
Right.
down to Hunt or Ingram or Kerrville. St. Peter's in Kerrville, the priest there, Bert Bates, it has videos on YouTube talking about the long-term recovery and that they are going to need help. And, sharing the trusted resources, Kerrville Breaking News Facebook
Right.
page is a great one. Um, and, they'll tell you about, the Community Foundation, looking at where the benefits are going to be. George Strait is going to do a benefit, and
Right.
Ray Wiley Hubbard did a benefit, and Rudoso. And so, like, looking and sharing those resources really does help people feel like they're doing something. But don't pack up old clothes and
Right.
send it and drive it down and drop it off in Kerrville. So, I mean,
All right, I'm gonna come back to something, one other thing that you said, Reverend. I'm gonna put a hold for a second. Jolie, your perspective, which you can describe much better than I can, you know, started thousands of miles from central Texas in a place called Christchurch, New Zealand. All right. So give a little bit of your perspective of that lesson, but also as you talk with folks now and as you are working with, you know, again, you're there typically you know, um, on the ground, but it's again around this periphery, Jolie. So take a little bit of time to tell your story, but also how do you handle, what do you suggest for people to do for folks around the periphery?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Hannah, firstly, for sharing your perspectives. 'Cause, yeah, it's we often hear that the expression, this is the club that no one wants to be part of, right? Those that have been through disaster. So I'm one of those in that club, that we never signed up for, never wanted to be part of. But there have been some unexpected gifts in amongst all the hard pieces. So I now live in Denver in Colorado, but I'm originally from Christchurch, New Zealand. And 15 years ago, we had a really big earthquake. And just to give you a sense, because this is not about that disaster at all, today's not about that. So I just want to cover it super quickly. But population 300,000 at the time, and 9 out of 10 houses and homes were damaged or destroyed. So the impact was huge in terms of the rebuild of an entire city and the grief and disruption and the loss of 185 precious lives. So it was a huge disaster. And I only mention that because I suddenly found myself with a leadership role that I didn't anticipate. I was a local that was impacted myself, living in the city that I loved, leading a team of people who were also locals impacted, who are then supporting their community. And that has become the role that we have in other disasters. So my career has since been a series of disasters, we often say. So, I always wish I was meeting people in better circumstances. But our role is always to support those locals on the ground who are going to be there for the long haul for their communities, who suddenly find themselves in a role like I did. Like, what are the resources and supports that are really helpful for those locals to have access to? What is helpful to know? Every community is different, every disaster is different, but there's very much some things that are helpful to understand and know around what's normal, what's helpful, what's useful, what can we expect. Those things are all super helpful to have, just to make a really tough, hard journey just that little bit easier. And so Hummingly Foundation is all about that, but it's also about making sure, when often what we see in front of us is the physical aspects. We see the homes that are lost, we see the roads that are lost. And for us, it's really important that we're not just focusing on rebuilding structures, that we're really putting people at the heart of recovery, that we're rebuilding lives, we're rebuilding community. And really for us, Hummingly is all about making sure that the human aspects of recovery are supported, and that people have the resources and supports they need to be able to do that well. And there are just a couple of things, Richard, I thought might be helpful to share in terms of what we've seen play out for those that are on the periphery and wanting to process what they are feeling, and also trying to understand how they can help. So the first one, when I think about those on the periphery, we often hear talk about what we call the hierarchy of grief. So no matter how people are impacted, they often don't feel like they have a right to feel it, or a right to support because there's someone worse off than them. So people tend to put themselves on this totem pole, you know, like, did I lose a loved one? Did I lose a home? Am I from the community? And, you know, and so no matter where we are, we tend to compare ourselves to someone who's worse off. And we do have to be super sensitive for those that have, you know, maybe more direct impacts than us. But also sometimes that hierarchy of grief can be unhelpful because it means that it really downplays and invalidates, you know, the very real, I call them ripples of impact, right? These ripples are very, very real. And so whether, you know, you have a connection to that place or you have a connection to the people of that place that have suffered loss, or whether you've been through a disaster or trauma that's similar before, you know, any of these pieces, they are valid and they are real, and it's absolutely okay to be feeling all of the feelings that come with that grief and all of those impacts. So I wanted to start with that. We call it the ripple of impact. They are real. And so just making sure for ourselves and for others that we're not downplaying any of those very valid impacts, right? And the
Which
valid.
could also include, just real quick, could include, you know, guilt.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't have as much loss as somebody else, or I didn't lose somebody, but I feel it, right? So
Yeah.
it's basically saying whether I think that's, you know, brilliant to what, you know, Hannah mentioned, and that is, you know, different ways, different things.
Yeah. Yeah. And the range is huge, right? You
Right.
might feel guilt, you might feel sorry, you might feel grief, you might feel really proud of how you coped, or really lucky. You know, the range is huge. You know, it may just bring into focus what is really important in your life. And, you know, so the range of experiences and what is normal and usual is really, you know, a really huge range. So, and as Hannah said, you know, you'll have people who experience things in different ways. So just allowing space for that for yourself and for other people, I think is really important, you know, without sort of downplaying what people are experiencing or having a view on what they should be experiencing, because there is no such thing. So
Right.
yeah,
Right.
if that's helpful. And then the second thing I would say is, you know, there's something we call vicarious trauma, and that's, you know, people that are supporting others and hear stories, but that happens not only for the supporters, but essentially I should have mentioned to start with, my background is in cognitive science. So I have a master's in cognitive psychology. So I'm really interested in the brain science piece. And what happens in our brain when we hear a story, whether it's on the media or whether it's from someone who's impacted, is our brain is not just making that story sort of real through mental images. It's doing something much deeper than that. It is trying to simulate that actual experience. So to give you, you know, an example, if we were like, Richard, if you were to imagine a flashing light, I just want you to imagine a flashing light for a second, right? If we did a brain scan on your brain right now, the visual area of your brain would be lit up, right? And if I were to say to you, Hannah, I want you to imagine someone tapping on your skin, right? The tactile part of your brain would be lit up. And if I ask you to imagine, you know, standing and looking at the Eiffel Tower, people's eyes track upwards. And, you know, if you were to be given a glass of water and we tell you to imagine it's lemon juice, you salivate more. And so it's not just about these mental images. We are reliving a story as if it's happening to us. Our brain is trying to simulate it as if we were actually experiencing it right then and there. And so there's a very real impact of listening to stories or seeing stories on the media. And so if you're feeling the impact of that, that's very real. Like it's a real thing, right? So that vicarious trauma piece is a very real thing. And it's one of the reasons we always say, you know, watch enough or look at enough media to be informed in a way that's helpful. But it's kind of that old adage, you are what you eat. So what is your kind of appetite, or what is your, I guess, diet of social media is going to influence your thoughts and your feelings and everything else. So being very intentional about being mindful about what you expose yourself to, how much you expose yourself to. What is if your day is and your social media is a pie and you were to slice it up, you know, how much are you really giving your brain that vicarious trauma experience? So, you know, are we getting a good balanced diet in terms of, you know, not doom scrolling? And yeah, especially important when you've got kids, right, in terms of what they're being exposed to as well. So I kind of want to start with that first piece, the ripples of impact, you know, to validate people's experience if they're on the periphery. And I guess that's the first port of call if you're looking to support others, is to remember that, right? People have a right to their different experiences and their different reactions, and they can be varied and rich.
All
Yeah.
right, so I'm going to play off of something that both of y'all are not saying.
Mm.
Anger.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Which is
absolutely one of the
which,
many emotions.
which in this case is a mixture of anger of, I guess there's two things that I've listened to, I've received, even I've reacted to. Okay. One is, how could this happen?
Hmm.
How could, in a modern innovation technology information world, how could this happen? That's one aspect of it, right? The other is, Reverend, how could God let this happen? Right. So there's this anger that seems to be also very palatable right now. Part of it is driven also, Jolie, by the scrolling, because it's
Yeah.
just like, between pictures of the children, pictures of the adults, pictures of the community, those visual, like you said, visual losses, okay, go the other end of the extreme, which is this significant anger. All
Yeah.
right. So I'm going to ask both of y'all to respond to that because, let me go, Reverend, with you, and that is, how could God let this happen?
Mm.
Right. Especially to these little kids.
I'm glad we have, a spiritual expert to answer that one.
Right.
I'll put myself on mute for now.
Right. To Jolie, to the idea of how could we let this happen, structurally, right? Which seems to be very appropriate. Like you said, it's no question, no judgment. Whatever the sense of feelings and emotions are very real and very appropriate. But these also, too, this issue about anger seems to be almost coming through just as much, sometimes if not more. So, Hannah, what's your sense of that?
Well, I'll answer that first with a personal. I get angry at God all the time, and God can take our anger. God can take our anger. We have a right to be angry and to question God when terrible things happen, because we as well in my tradition we don't believe in a vengeful God, and we believe in a loving God that wants the good for the greatest amount of people, and that God is love and that God is life-giving. And yet at the same time, God is also the God of death. God is with us. God is the Alpha and the Omega.
Right.
God is with us at our beginning and our end. Our human condition is mortal. Death and suffering are part of our condition. So while we're gifted each one with one precious life, we're not guaranteed that it will go on forever. And so in my tradition, we're called um, to work for the greater good and to sacrifice for the greater good. And sometimes that's more to have sometimes that's more successful than other
Right.
times. And we also are human, and when what's so first, we're not in control, and there is suffering, and we recognize and have to accept that bad things happen to good people. And if we live long enough, we know that we see a lot of that.
Right.
And what we have to ask ourselves is, how do we respond? That's what's in our control, right? Is how do we respond? And again, in my tradition, in the Episcopal Church, part of that is to be part of the solution. And by sacrifice, I mean, make decisions with, that will protect our neighbors, even if that means that I'm, taxed more or whatever.
Right.
I don't want to, I don't want to get political, but those kind of decisions, and to speak the truth about certain things. And I'm not enough of an expert in all the thing, and not to judge right away either.
Right.
Wait to see. And everybody now wants to make a statement, wait to find out more. So, there's all sorts of reams of books, theological books on, theodicy, which is why terrible things happen, why God lets them happen. But God gives us the resources and doesn't make us robots and gives us the freedom to choose what to do with the resources.
There's the bridge, right? There's a bridge between the two of y'all, okay, so to speak. And that is that one, like I did earlier today when we were down in Galveston and I went to the end of the rocks and I just screamed, right? But the reality is that we are given choices. That's number one. Number two, we are given abundant resources to do something before, during, and after, and how we step up before, during, and after. I do think, Hannah, that longer conversation at some point about, the hand of God coming down and some phenomenal miracle in picking these, children and adults and moving them away, right? God, how. So I do think what reason why I asked this question about anger is there are, like you said, Jolie, stages of grief, stages of recovery. Anger is one of those appropriate ones, but also understanding and thinking through whether it's faith or technical or science or whatever part of your thinking through anger. It's okay, it's appropriate, and I also think anger is very action oriented. So Julie, talk about, play off of this, that you've got this faith-based religious side of the anger, but then there's this other part of anger.
And that's why I love having, the Reverend here, because everything's so multidimensional, right? You can look at it from so many different lenses, and it's important that we do. Yeah. So I can bring a little bit more of the biological piece. But just, first, I have the honor and privilege to be involved with all sorts of survivor groups or bereaved groups around the world who lost loved ones or experienced terrible things and really shocking disasters where there was a human element. And, anger is normal. It's, again, one part of the spectrum that you can expect. And as you said, Richard, it often drives positive change, for prevention of something similar in the future. So a lot of good in the long run, as painful, incredibly painful as it is in the meantime, a lot of incredibly positive change and meaning comes often driven by that anger, through that process. So it can be a fuel for positive action. The other thing it's helpful to know is that, just the biological process and what is happening in that, in that moment is that we are designed when there is a threat to, our survival, for us to mobilize all of the resources in our body to be able to try and optimize our chance of survival.
Right.
So that whole fight and flee thing, right?
Yeah.
And so when we see a problem and when we see a huge challenge and when we see something horrible happening, again, our body is mobilizing all of this energy and all these resources for action.
Yep.
And the problem sometimes is we can't address it. We can't physically fix it. We can't solve it, and so when you have that sense of helplessness, I want to sort whatever is right in front of me that is just huge and horrible, and you can't fix it and you can't change it. All of that energy has been deployed and it has to go somewhere.
Right.
And very often it comes out as emotion. So it's really helpful just to understand. Sometimes it's, it's tears and distress. Sometimes it's anger. Sometimes, we'll do the opposite and we'll numb and shut down. But it's really helpful to understand that, it's a very human process. If we're human, it's one of the things that we might expect. So just understanding where that comes from is sometimes really helpful. It's our body trying to address whatever challenges in front of us, and when we can't fix it, then often there's a reason for this, these big emotions.
So I kind of take a look at, again, all of us on the periphery who, one, want to help our friends, help these communities. We don't live there. There's ways to do this, but to some degree, you got to kind of start with yourself for a little bit.
Yeah.
as kind of a part of, being quote unquote, the realization, Reverend, as you said, is this is a lot to take in. Sad but true. I keep on saying this since 9/11. It's just been waves and waves and waves. And it's like, oh, can somebody call time out for a little bit and not have something, crazy occur? So I think, to this issue of grief and recovery, there's a couple of things. I read and listened over the past couple of days. When we're with individuals who have had this kind of loss, especially a child, all right, it's okay to say, here's a great memory I remember, or think of that person, or think of that child, or what's a memory that you have, right? I do think that what we learn to say in this time is, one, to listen. I think that's what both of y'all said, listen, okay? Second of all, what is a phrase that lets them know you're thinking of them, you're thinking of the loss, you're recognizing the loss, you're not trying to avoid it. Third, I call it the "for the love of God, do not give me a Hallmark card" response. If I wanted to give you you'll get over it. The weeks will be better for you. Come on, that's not.
Richard, just to give you a story, like one of my roles was supporting those that lost loved ones from those 185 that passed away. And it got to the point that group would have a competition about what is the most inappropriate thing that people had said to them. Like, it's all right, you'll get another husband, right? And and that sometimes, I think, paralyzes us because we're not quite sure how to respond. And I think the biggest thing is, to remember it's not about you. We are driven by our need to help, and we worry about doing the right thing. And I think it's just that genuinely being there, being present. You don't even have to say anything.
Correct.
Right? It's that listening, that presence, that I don't really know what to say, but I'm here for you. Right.
And I think even just saying that,
in
its own right. I mean, Reverend, I think we all
absolutely
want to,
yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just saying that, and not saying it's going to be all right. I mean, sometimes people say some of those trite things themselves, but and it's meaningful to them, but it's not meaningful if you say it.
Right.
And yeah, and just showing up and trying to think, and not asking, managing yourself, which is very hard for North Americans. I don't know about people in New Zealand, but the people like they want to help. They have this instinct because they also want to. They think they know. We think we know what's best, and we have a real need to fix it. And so, while you're grieving, as you said, there's on the periphery, the vicarious trauma and your own PTSD from other things you've been through, for whatever it is. You need to manage that and have a support system, in order to be the support system for others. And I mean, that doesn't mean you have to wait until you see your spiritual director or therapist or go to your support group or whatever, but it means that you have to be doing those things in order to be a good friend or colleague or neighbor in recovery, in the recovery phase. And I had a really wonderful learning from a friend who lost her child, not from a flood, but from cancer. And I just stopped talking about good things that happened to me. And she's like, I don't want to stop hearing about the good things in life. I want to still, I don't want to be the sad friend, right? I want to, and not right away, of course, but in the weeks and months ahead, she's like, I'm not half your friend. You share my sorrow and I share your joy, right?
That's a great line. That's a great line, right? That's because it is two sides of the same coin. Am I saying that right?
And yeah, there's so much to say about that. And if we're in Houston, there are a lot of resources.
Right.
Um, and um, and so, a part of that, what I saw coming home were networks sharing those resources. Because sometimes when you're in the middle of it, and that you can either be on the periphery in the middle of it, right?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like you're trying to stop doom scrolling, or you're trying to figure out how to be the best colleague, or sometimes that's just saying, hey, I can um, pick up dinner for you. I can do a load of laundry. I can um, cut your grass. And which one of those, would be most helpful to you? And they can say nothing, or they can say, hey, it'd be great if you come with your lawnmower over here or whatever. And that way you also don't make it work for people to figure out how to help you help them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a big burden, isn't it? Like it's the people themselves have lost so much, and then they're often having to educate and support others in their how to support them. And I think, yeah, whatever we can do to make that easy. The one thing I would suggest too that I think is really helpful is that what happens is recovery is a hugely long process. It takes, a really long time, and it's just human for those on the periphery to be impacted initially, and then we get sucked back into everyday life and other demands, no matter our intent. And so I would just say what is really important is people often feel forgotten about once the attention moves on. It's a bit like grief. People are there for the funeral, but not often there when people, most need them 6 months, 1 year, 2 years on. So if you are supporting someone, do whatever you need to make sure you set yourself up for the long term, even if you have to put reminders in your calendar, just to make sure you are there over the long haul, because that's when people need it most,
It
so
gets quiet when
yeah.
and it's, so I know that I have taken up an hour on a Sunday evening for the two of y'all. Um, I know dialogues and conversations and coffees are going to occur like this in 1,000+ places. I hope they do. These are just a couple examples. I know all four of these, as places for people to put their dollars. Julie, you heard me say this, I think, when we were in Denver, is, Hurricane Harvey comes along and we get 8,000 winter coats here in Houston during Hurricane Harvey. Okay. Oh my God. I mean, maybe, when we had the ice and snowstorm, but it seems to be these types of organizations and others, whether it's the Episcopalian, relief group. But I kind of thought, folks trying to put some dollars to work, this would be the way to do it. And then I'm hoping that my friends and professional networks and others who hopefully will listen to this, their own way, will realize that, sad but true, we're going to keep on having these kinds of disasters and weather events. There's a lot of anger. There's a lot of things that technically can be done. There's a lot of things that already have more than enough resources to solve or prevent or limit these disaster impacts in the future. But what it really, really comes down to, for me, and I think both Reverend and Jolie and others, is this is about people. This is about humanity. And if we are not finding ways to think about what ourselves and how we're grieving, I will say no one that I could ever think about 10 years ago would have ever even thought about the phrase doom scrolling.
Mhm.
And that is also something, Reverend, that I know whatever faith it is, people are saying just for one day, get off of social media, step
Yes.
away from, this screen, which
Yeah.
is both a blessing and a curse. Just step away from allowing your mind to think in a different, level of humanity. So listen, I cannot thank the both of y'all enough for doing this at the last minute. Hopefully this will help